Hello, how are we? So, as we await the result of the vote of no confidence in the Irish government, it's important to always try and contextualize things, right? Because we don't exist in a vacuum. And 2026 is the product of 2025 and so on ad infinitum. You can go, okay? And so in order to try and make sense of what we're seeing, the total just flat denial of, I won't say human rights because that's always up for debate, right? But the flat denial of other people as being sentient human beings that deserve the most fundamental of respect, right? Which is, we hear what you're saying, right? I see you, I hear you, I'm listening to you, right? And many people in Ireland are starting to realise that that's all, that has always been, well, maybe not that has always been. We'll start off with today. That's not happening today. Why? The next question is, it naturally implies a study of history. So if it hasn't been going on today, or if it isn't happening today, when did it start? Because many people are getting wide to the fact that, or being confronted with the fact that they were brought up to assume that those down the road and those that fix the road are friends, right? They might attend funerals and weddings together. They might play golf together. They might play cards together. They might know each other on a first name basis. However, those individual person-to-person relationships have only ever been political. And as soon as the political winds of change turn against these people who once shared rooms and shared events with these politicians, then those interpersonal relationships, they don't mean anything anymore, right? Why? Because my decisions and your feelings about your life and your people and your country, and my feelings about my life, my family, my people, my country, they don't mean anything to those that are in power in Ireland. Indeed, they don't mean anything to those who have power over the people that have power in Ireland. And the purpose of me recording this is just to try and paint a little bit of a context, right? We don't exist in a vacuum, and I think there's a serious fallacy as well that I've seen, particularly over the last few years with COVID, etc. People confuse the moment when they began to recognize that something was rotten in Denmark with the beginning of the rot. They're two very different things, right? And my point on that is, just because you've come to realize that much of the charade of modern day Western liberal democratic countries is a charade, does not mean that you've identified the time at which that charade began. It did not begin with COVID. If it had begun with COVID, no one would have fell for it, right? COVID is the end result of years and decades of priming and planning and manipulating and moulding and shaping, right? To control the animal, you can attack it physically directly and hog tie it. Difficult, you could get bit, you could die in the process. Or you can manipulate and slowly control the environment of the animal and encroach until the animal's penned in. You now control it without ever having to touch it, right? So the walls have been centuries in the making. And what I'm going to do is read a few quotes from an interesting book, make of it what you will, but read as much as you can. Take everything in as a potential, and with new information, reevaluate the world that you're looking at and ask yourself, does that make sense? Does this new information explain a little bit about what I'm seeing, right? Never mind is it right or wrong for a start. Leave that off to other people. Does this new information make things make a little bit more sense to me, right? And the book is Worldwide Evil and Misery by Robin de Ruiter and Fritz Springmeier. Interesting book, and the name of it is Worldwide Evil and Misery, the Legacy of 13 Satanic Bloodlines, right? And what they get into here, which I'm not going to get into, is basic fundamental stuff, right? We get so hoodwinked with the idea of waging war against billionaires and against companies and against conglomerates, right? But you're kind of tilting at windmills to a degree there, because these things are controlled by people, and people that control such things have families, and families have histories, and families with histories also end up having a set of core beliefs that will be carried on or not, right? But when you're dealing with the machinations of society, right, whether you're talking about capitalists, stakeholders, communists, all that stuff, fundamentally you're dealing with people. And as I said, people have families, they have relationships, and they even have their own religions, right? A persistent set of beliefs and a persistent set of attitudes towards themselves juxtaposed against the other person, right? That is a belief system, it is an ideology, it is a worldview that you're not privy to. And as power goes, centralized power will always have to hide itself. It can't be too explicit and too overt, because there are people that own or partake of such power. They're always outnumbered, right? So they're always going to live in fear, right? And we know this in Ireland, right? We're told that the landed Protestants always lived in fear of the Catholic retaliation, right? Or, put the ideologies aside, those who came and claimed land from another people were always concerned and fearful of those native people reasserting themselves or asserting themselves over those who came and took the land, right? I like to keep the tags, the concepts and labels to the side, because they're so loaded, right? But what I'm going to do, sorry for the long-winded intro, but what I'm going to do is read some quotes, and this book does a great job of gathering kind of real important quotes from real important people. I'm going to read a few of them. And the first one is from Honoré de Balzac, right, an author. And he said, quote, "There are people that remain behind the scenes of the world stage, and that is why there are two types of history. First, the official, forged and usum Delphini, and second, the secret one, in which the real causes of events are written down. A disgraceful history," end quote. The Victorian English politician Benjamin Disraeli once alleged, quote, "The world is governed by very different personages from what is imagined by those who are not behind the scenes," right? This guy was at the pinnacle of English politics, right? And he's telling you, it ain't me, right? Believe it if you want. But after so many of these people, and you start to see it, when these things start to stack up over time and across wide spaces and distances, the backdrop of what's going on today, history, is painted for you. Edward Bernays, who, what would you call him? The creator of public relations, PR, right? Who wrote books, one of them called Propaganda. And he says, and again, what I want people to take from this as well, He was a nephew of Sigmund Freud, right? And that's not to condemn Sigmund Freud in any way. What I want people to take from that is to show that he was using Freud's ideas and using them effectively enough that this man became incredibly wealthy and powerful in American society. What does that tell you? That Freud was a pervert? No. It tells you that Freud's ideas had such validity that this man was able to manipulate an entire nation based off of those ideas. So what would that say to you? You should probably understand these ideas instead of just writing them off instantly. There's a reason why academics and doctors and people have created, the media too, created this knee-jerk response to Freud, because it stops you from going and actually reading the man's works, right? And it stops you from going and tooling yourself up with the ability to spot how his ideas are being used to effectively manipulate you, right? But Edward Bernays says, quote, "We are governed, our minds are moulded, our tastes formed, our ideas suggested largely by men that we have never heard of. In almost every act of our daily lives, whether in the sphere of politics or business, in our social conduct or our ethical thinking, we are dominated by this relatively small number of persons," end quote. He would know, right? He's working for him. The German politician Walter Rathenau in 1912, again, big sphere of time, relatively, says, quote, "Approximately 300 men that know each other and that appoint their successors themselves determine the fate of this world. Their power exists in absolute confidentiality," end quote. Buckminster Fuller said, quote, "Great nations are simply the operating fronts of behind-the-scenes, vastly ambitious individuals who have become so effectively powerful because of their ability to remain invisible while operating behind the national scenery," end quote. Ambitious individuals who are also part of families. These families intermingle, right? Naturally. If big, powerful, influential, wealthy families, they want to marry into other families who are on a par with them to increase their scope of influence, increase their scope of power and wealth, and their own sense of security, right? And there's naturally a eugenic sort of view of it as well, that a class view too, that these people are genetically on a par with me, right? We're up there in terms of the pinnacle of humanity, of course. Whether right or wrong, make of it what you will, it's nearly a natural outcome. In 1912, Woodrow Wilson said, quote, "We have come to be one of the worst ruled, one of the most completely controlled and dominated governments in the world. No longer a government of free opinion, no longer a government by conviction and vote of the majority, but a government by the opinion and duress of small groups of dominant men. And," end quote, "these men have mothers who are part of these lineages, who marry into other families which are part of similar bloodlines, who have daughters whose daughters marry men from other families, similar families." So to just lay this all at men, let's be realistic. Theodore Roosevelt in 1912 said, quote, "Behind the visible government there is an invisible government, upon the throne that owes the people no loyalty and recognizes no responsibility," end quote. JFK, in his famous speech, one of them at least, said, quote, "We are opposed around the world by a monolithic, ruthless conspiracy," end quote. Nobel Prize winners here, George Wald said, quote, "I do not believe that in the West the governments actually rule. According to me, it's the accomplices of the huge financial and industrial powers that rule. There are innumerable multinationals that, like global giants, have gathered power and immense wealth. These are not just companies, they are world powers. Do they have military power? Of course they have military power. Can they control and manage power? Of course, they manage our governments," end quote. Arthur Jensen, a professor at the University of California, says, quote, "There are no nations, there are no peoples, there are no Russians, there are no Arabs, there are no third worlds, there is no West, there is no America, there is no democracy. There is only IBM and IT&T and AT&T and DuPont, Dow, Union Carbide and Exxon. Those are the nations of the world today. We no longer live in a world of nations and ideologies." End quote. The president of Chile said in 1972, said to the United Nations, quote, "The power of these concerns crosses all borders. We witness the explicit battle between multinationals and the sovereign states. The most important political, economical and military decisions of these states are being undermined by global organizations that are not controlled nor held responsible by any government or political organization. The entire political structure of the world is being undermined." A Russian general, Leonid Ivashov, says, quote, "We are dealing with the rise of a new geopolitical supranational power on the world scene. This geopolitical power consists of the richest families on this planet, together with the most powerful multinationals which they run. They rule and control all countries and all coalitions. The true aim of this elite group is complete control of planet Earth." End quote. Now, naturally, you're going to have, if you take Malachi Martin, a former Jesuit priest, Irish Jesuit priest, his view was that you have three people. You have the Vatican kind of sphere of influence, right? You have the transnationalists, entrepreneurial capitalists, and then you have the socialists, or the kind of the Russian Soviet style thinking, right? And they're going to vie. They're going to come out and say, well, look what they're doing over there, right? And you can see this in Ireland, right? And if you're watching, I know I'm dancing around a little bit here, but I'm trying to plug it all in together. If you've been watching, I can't listen to too much of it because it just doesn't, it's not real. There's not of any substance being said. It's all fluff and nonsense, right? It's all PR, Edward Bernays, right? Propaganda. How do we manipulate and mould? What he found is that you appeal to people's emotions and desires, right? Their sensual desires. And that sells things. That's why ads are full of sex, all that stuff. It makes sense now. We understand it now, okay? But if you've been watching some of the Dáil and the politicians speak, and I'm going to keep banging on about this because I think it's so salient, because it's so obvious once you use it as a way of evaluating what people are saying, people in positions of power are saying. Sinn Féin, Social Democrats, and I couldn't listen to any of the rest of them, they are in an absolute unlosable position where they could absolutely decimate Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil. And the whole world is watching. All of Ireland is watching today, and there's many, many, many people in different nations that are watching what's going on in the Dáil today. And what does their arguments amount to? Basically, you didn't spend the money that you took off the people the way we would have done it. That's it. That's it. They appeal to, my constituents are telling me that they've no food and they don't know whether to feed the kids or turn on the heat. We all know these stories. Poverty exists and we go through phases of it. But they never tell you how that poverty came to be. They just say, they did it. Look at the wrong things they did with your taxes. We wouldn't have done it that way. We would have spent your money in a different... We still would have taken it off you, if not more. We just would have spent it differently. And that's what it amounts to. Right? It doesn't go anywhere. And my point on reference in that is... And this is another point that Irish people need to take into their marrow, right? You need to absorb this and know this. Just because somebody says something against somebody that you disagree with or don't like does not make that person a companion or a loyal friend. It does not. It does not mean they're on your side. It just means they happen to be directing something against someone that you would like to direct a similar thought at. It does not mean that you're on the same page or that you're fighting the same fight, right? You need to start evaluating what people are saying by what they're choosing not to say, right? And all that's going on today in the Dáil is the blame game. Political point scoring, largely. None of them are ever pointing out the fact that, do you know what? We've tried robbing people blind in this country, and we've clearly seen that's not working. Let's all be humble enough to put our hands up and say, let's try not robbing them blind. That would be the natural reaction if you're being sensible. We've tried this extreme. What would be the opposite? Will we try the opposite, or will we try and meet in the middle somewhere? Right? How about stop fleecing people? Give people more choice. They don't want that. I'm going to continue on now. There's just a few more. And then I'll wrap this up. And you can go about your day, right? Winston Churchill, quote, "The one who cannot see that on earth a big endeavour is taking place, an important plan, thought gone into it, right? An important plan on which realisation we are allowed to collaborate as faithful servants, certainly has to be blind." Now, this man was the leader of England, right? And he's considering himself, I'm just blessed to be able to collaborate as a faithful servant. That's the pecking order. He was not sitting on the top of that, right? We have George Bush, again, George Bush the Elder, in 1991, famous speech. He says, quote, "Now we can see a new world order coming into view, a world in which there is the very real prospect of a new world order." And he's another few of them as well. He says, quote, "What is at stake is more than one small country. It is a big idea, a new world order, to achieve the universal aspirations of mankind based on shared principles and the rule of law, the illumination of 1,000 points of light. The winds of change are with us now." End quote. That's religious talk. And look at the vagueness of it, right? So, let's achieve the universal aspirations of mankind. That doesn't mean anything. Based on shared principles and the rule of law. They never tell you what that is, right? They got the concept of family, the reality of family and nationhood. And then what they do, because they know that there's a natural, instinctual longing for belonging, they sell you back these things. We know we've destroyed the nuclear family and the idea of being a patriot or a nationalist. We're after pissing all over that and running that flag through the mud and calling anyone that wants to express their natural instinct towards their own people and for their own people. We call them all sorts of things. And then what we do, we know you're hungry, we know you're longing and sad for something, we sell it back to you. Come to us. We have it all. We have the togetherness. We have the shared principles, the rule of law, right? We're aspiring, what was it? The universal aspirations of mankind. That's what we're aimed at. Just come over here. Sounds lovely, means nothing, right? Paul Monteau, taken from the foreword of The International Understanding by John Eugene Harley in 1931, says, quote, "And the builders of this new world order." Interesting, right? So you have this guy talking about this 60 years before George Bush said it. So that what you're seeing is a continuation, the continuity of a plan, of an enacted belief in the world on you. Quote, "And the builder of this new world order must be education. Education alone can lay the foundation on which the building is to rest. How can the elite spread its influence over the masses? Here we encounter the real problem, and it is essentially a problem of education. During the last decade of the 19th century, a group of men endeavoured to prepare the public mind for broad changes. To this end, they founded the London School of Economics and Political Science, which today ranks among the most famous institutions of education. I would add to that the Tavistock Institute and the Royal Institute of International Affairs and Oxford University. And I would suggest to people, go and look up the alumni of Oxford University and see where these people, knowing what this man just said, seeing what positions these people end up in, the ideas that they have and the influence that they have on you and have had on you and the world around you first. Remember the animal, don't attack it directly, manipulate, encroach on the environment first, and then you will snare the animal without it realising. Without it realising it was ever being stalked. Winston Churchill, 1947, quote, "Our final goal is to install an all-powerful government on a world level, and we will strive for that," end quote. Remember he said after World War II, or during it, that the aim was not to win the war against Germany. It was to destroy the German people. Why? Because the German people, historically, stood up against empire. Romans never really conquered Germany, right? Continuation. Certainly conquered England, though. It's a continuation of these things. Now, at the Senate on Foreign Relations Committee 1950, we have John Paul Warburg, big banking family, says, quote, "We shall have a world government. Matter of factly, right? Whether or not we like it. The question is only whether world government will be achieved by consent or by conquest." End quote. The Mid-Century Challenge to US Foreign Policy, a document, 1959, sponsored by the Rockefeller Brothers Fund, says, quote, "The United States cannot escape, and indeed should welcome, the task which history has imposed on us. This is the task of helping to shape a new world order in all its dimensions, spiritual, economic, political, social," end quote. Robert Kennedy said, 1967, quote, "All of us will ultimately be judged on the effort we have contributed to building a new world order," end quote. Who do we have here? Richard Gardner, former US Deputy Assistant Secretary of State and US Ambassador to Italy. Right, these are people that they've travelled a little, right? They've seen a few things. Does it make it right? No. Does it make it true? No. But it's not just someone shouting from across the road at you, right? These are people who have been in positions that we haven't been, so they might know a little. They might have picked up a couple of things that we're not privy to. In 1968, he said, "In short, we are likely to do better by building our house of world order from the bottom up rather than the top down. It will look like a great booming, buzzing confusion, to use William James's famous description of reality. But a final run around national sovereignty, eroding it piece by piece, is likely to get us to world order faster than the old-fashioned frontal attack." And that's interesting, because that it encapsulates what I'm saying about the encroachment, right? If you're going out hunting deer, you're not going to run at the deer and declare your intentions, right? Because the deer will be gone. But what he's saying is, instead of coming out in positions of power and telling people, look, whether you like it or not, we're taking everything off you, you start at the people's level. You start studying their culture. You start studying the things they prioritise, the values they esteem and regard. And then you start infiltrating. You use the things that they like to sell them more of it, right? Use their own value systems against them. Western nations particularly, we appreciate a streak of individuality. So what do you do there? You get in and you enhance that. You use that as a weapon against the people. Now all of a sudden, instead of just understanding and respecting that there's a little bit of individuality in everybody and you can't trample on that, now it becomes everybody is an absolute unique individual and every worldview is as valuable as anyone else's worldview. There's to be no moral condemnation or judgment against any perspective anymore, right? And that's what you've seen over the decades. Now, total nonsense and perspectives that are absolutely devoid of reality and unhinged, untethered to reality, are now elevated to the same sort of prestige as the most moral of people. The very idea of morality itself has after been nearly extinguished, right? That's what he says. Final run around national sovereignty, eroding it piece by piece. Nelson Rockefeller says, quote, "There is a fever of nationalism," this is 1969. "The nation state is becoming less and less competent to perform its international political tasks. These are some of the reasons pressing us to lead vigorously toward the true building of a new world order." Right? So they say it up front, never believing that people would go and read anything that they said, nor particularly probably caring if they did, because they feel like they had it sewn up. And the point he's making is that the perspective they have is we want the world and everything in it. It belongs to us because we're the powerful ones. We're the savage ones and the smart ones. And we're so far above intellectually than the everyman that just by that very dynamic, we have a right to take everything from them. Right? That's the perspective. A social Darwinism. That the most capable predator is the one that's worthy of the spoils. That's the worldview. And what's getting in the way was individual nation states. So they have to figure out a way of going around it. Now, once individual nation states are captured, and there's the viceroy government in there, then what gets in the way? It's the same playbook. It's just scaled up or scaled down. In order for a captured national government or captured government of a nation to steamroll the people and sell off everything and take everything, what gets in the way is the individual and the family and the individual, right? So they need to go around that again. They need to undercut that again, piece by piece, right? So in order to stop, first you want as small a number of the enemy as possible. In Ireland's case, you don't want families having 5, 6, 7, 8 kids anymore, because there's an awful lot of loyalty involved in that. There's an awful lot of power sharing and wealth sharing and favour giving, right? And companies and businesses and connections and networks that manifest out of massive families like that. So, what do? You target women. And what do you target in women? Their pride, their ego. Matter-of-factly, right? Women love the image of themselves. It's a weakness of them. Men have their own weaknesses. But each trait has a weakness and a strength, right? And women's pride is absolutely easy to manage and easy to manipulate. So you start selling them this Sex in the City idea of life, where you don't need no man, right? You can live whatever kind of life you want. You can have a career and become dominant over men, if you so wish. And then maybe if you're 35, you might have a child. You might adopt one. But when you're 35, all men will still love you because you're great. You know? And you have the birth control, all that stuff. All these things, right? It dwindles down the size of the family, which, to those that are pulling the strings, minimizes the impact of the enemy. The very thing they want to steamroll over, right? And ultimately, I would imagine, when you realize, you know what, there's a certain groups of people that we just can't roll over. What we do then, we just start piling hundreds of thousands of different people into the same areas and leave them just battle it out while we pull the carrots out of their back garden and leg it off of them, right? West German Chancellor Willy Brandt said, quote, "The New World Order is a world that will have one supranational authority that will regulate the world trade and industry, an international organization that will control the production and consumption of petroleum, an international currency that will replace the dollar, and an international police force to command the decrees of the New World Order," end quote. Council on Foreign Relations and Trilateralist Commission Henry Kissinger in 1975 said, quote, "To all peoples and governments, let us fashion together a new world order," end quote. In 1991, the Dalai Lama said, quote, "Perhaps the time has come to think more deeply or more philosophically in order to solve or to find new arrangements that are more enlightened and civilized, or what you call the New World Order. I feel the New World Order should be based on principles of compassion and freedom," right? Empty words. Empty words. They dress it up. So people who want some sort of father figure or some priestly figure in their life, they will project love and sincerity onto that person. But if you just pick it apart what he's saying the exact same thing, he just has flowery language around it. Mikhail Gorbachev says, quote, "World progress is only possible through our search for universal human consensus as we move forward to a new world order," right? Now, bear in mind, what you're hearing here is these big capitalist families from banking families, Rockefeller oil families, all of it, right? And now you're hearing the Russian side of it, which is supposed to be antagonistic towards that side, but they're all saying the same thing. Let's work here towards a new world order. And then you look at the works of Anthony Sutton, where he demonstrates that these big families funded the rise of the Nazis, funded the rise of the Bolsheviks, right? And started funding and promoting the welfare state in America. Interesting. And we're caught in the middle of that, right? Somewhere. Most of us have the clue of it anyway. Henry Kissinger again said, quote, "What Congress will have before it is not a conventional trade agreement, but the architecture of a new international system, a first step toward a new world order." Nelson Mandela, everybody's favourite, right, said, quote, "The new world order that is in the making must focus on the creation of a world of democracy, peace and prosperity for all," right? More fluff, but the same intention, total global domination. President Hosni Mubarak said, quote, "The renewal of the Non-Proliferation Treaty was described as important for the welfare of the whole world and the New World Order." Right, so wars are waged on this and peace is made because of the overall intention, spanning, as we've been read the quotes, centuries. David Rockefeller, after the 9/11 attacks at the Bilderberger conference, which our Jack Chambers was just at, right? This gathering of world leaders and leaders of industry to get together to not talk about that and too important, right? He said, quote, "We are on the verge of a global transformation. All we need is the right major crisis and the nations will accept the New World Order." Jacques Chirac, President of the French Republic in 2004, said, "It is by recognizing the new reality of a multipolar and interdependent world that we will succeed in building a sounder and fairer international order," end quote. And what if people don't want that? In Ireland, they'll call the army and the guards out, right? That's as simple as it goes. Because they don't serve you. If they did, they'd sit down and listen to you. Simple. Basic. When you keep it basic, it's simple. He also claimed, quote, this is Jacques Chirac, The world needs a strong Europe in a reforged transatlantic partnership to build a new world order that will guarantee lasting peace, security, and economic and human progress. Again, all fluff. Should Europe be strong? Yes. What should it be used for? That's a different conversation. Just another few, and then I'll leave you because it's getting a bit long. In 2007, Nicolas Sarkozy, the former president of the French Republic, said, quote, "It's on a global scale that we must consider and resolve the world's problems. France intends to pursue, with all people of goodwill, the battle to build a new world order of the 21st century. Peoples of the world, together we can build a better world for all mankind. In the name of France, I call on all states to unite to found the new world orders of the 21st century." Tilman Evers in the German Evangelical Adult Education said, quote, remember the education part of it, "A democratic new world order isn't the ultimate goal at all. In itself, it would be a contradiction in terms," end quote, right? So it's not to be a democratic new world order. We'll use democracy to get us closer to that. And once we're there, we don't really care what you have to think about it, right? Two more quotes from a former British intelligence man, Dr. John Coleman, who has written some excellent books, and I would encourage people to go and read them. In his Conspirators' Hierarchy, the story of the Committee of 300, he says, quote, "There is a worldwide conspiracy being orchestrated by an extremely powerful and influential group of genetically related individuals, at least at the higher levels, which include many of the world's wealthiest people, top political leaders and corporate elite, as well as members of the so-called black nobility of Europe, whose goal is to create a one-world government, stripped of nationalistic and regional boundaries, that is obedient to their agenda. Their intention is to obtain complete and total control over every human being on the planet and to dramatically reduce the world's population by 5.5 billion people. While the name New World Order is a term frequently used today when referring to this group, it's more useful to identify the principal organizations, institutions and individuals who make up this vast, interlocking spider web of elite conspirators," end quote. He says again, quote, "A one-world government and one unit monetary system under permanent, non-elected, hereditary oligarchs who self-select from among their numbers in the form of a feudal system as it was in the Middle Ages. In this one-world entity, population will be limited by restrictions on the number of children per family, diseases, wars, famines, until 1 billion people who are useful to the ruling class in areas which will be strictly and clearly defined remain as the total world population. There will be no middle class, only rulers and their servants. All laws will be uniform under an illegal system of world courts practicing the same unified code of laws, backed up by a one-world government police force and a one-world unified military to enforce laws in all former countries where no national boundaries shall exist. The system will be on the basis of a welfare state. Those who are obedient and subservient to the one-world government will be rewarded with the means to live. Those who are rebellious will simply be starved to death or be declared outlaws, thus a target for anyone who wishes to kill them." End quote. Digital ID, anybody?